getting to the breast milk, does stress impact the ability to breastfeed? Does it change
Yeah.
the the consistency of the breast milk or the chemical makeup of the breast milk?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so stress really does impede our ability to produce milk. Breast milk synthesis is dependent upon hormones, and hormones are governed by our emotions, right? And
Wow.
so what that means is if I'm really, really stressed out, then the hormones that are used to produce, or I should say, that are required to produce milk, like oxytocin, which is a hormone that engenders love and bonding and sense of transcendence, connection. That hormone is responsible for facilitating what's called the letdown reflex, which is essentially the sensation of the milk entering into the milk ducts to be released by the breast, right? That is controlled by oxytocin, which is you have to feel comfortable, safety. You have to feel connection, right? So oxytocin also mediates a bunch of what we call ejection reflexes. The sperm ejection reflex at ejaculation, the sperm introjection reflex during female orgasm, the fetal ejection reflex when a baby is born, right? So expelling the fetus, the placental ejection reflex where the placenta is expelled from the body, and then the contractions that essentially clamp down on the uterus to stop the bleeding so we don't have a postpartum hemorrhage. And then what we call the letdown reflex, which is the milk ejection reflex. So all of this is mediated by oxytocin, and you cannot be stressed out. You cannot be afraid. You cannot be in a sense of anxiety. You have to have calm. And so we try to restore peace and calm. We try to, really teach mindfulness tools for folks to be able to manage their stress and anxiety so that they can, contribute to breast milk synthesis. Yes, some people will still produce milk, but it does really impede your ability to produce at the quantities your body would normally produce at if you're really stressed out.
So let me ask you one last thing because we gotta take a break soon. But the important thing is that we all recognize that breast milk is the best source of nutrition for neonates, right? Not
Yep.
formula. But we know studies have shown that women of color, African American women, breastfeed at much lower rates than their counterparts in other races, right? Now, why is that? And what can, sisters that are listening here do to avoid whatever that reason is that, we're not breastfeeding at the levels we should be?
Yeah. And so I think it's so important first to, empower ourselves, but also take blame off of Black women, because I think there's so much that goes into this conversation when we think about like our health outcomes. People are like, well, how come this? And why don't they do that? And that's always sort of the lens is like something's our fault. Mm-hmm. When actually there are systemic barriers that have been placed for hundreds of years that contribute to the health outcomes we have. We used to have to nurse the babies of our white slave masters, right? Our ancestors had to nurse babies forcibly. Most of their milk supply was actually to go to those babies. Even the mistresses would time their pregnancies aligned with the timing of the enslaved women's pregnancy so that they could actually then have their babies, give their babies over to them. They would nurse them, and they would give them back to the white women. And while their babies were starving, right? And so, like, our bodies were commodified since the beginning of the history of this nation. And so now you have people who were the folks who did the most breastfeeding, who were the best breeders and feeders, so to speak, right? Who have like the worst birth outcomes, the worst fertility rates, and the worst breastfeeding outcomes. We were doing all this stuff, right, before. We were birthing all the babies, and now we have 2% of all doctors, or 2%, I should say, of physicians are female Black women, right? We were doing this before. So, like, all of these things have flipped, but not in our favor. And so I want to take the blame off of us because I think so much, like, makes it seem like we're doing something wrong when really we've been coming up with solutions for centuries. We've been nursing each other's babies. We've been doing donor milk. We've been, supporting each other through collective action. And I think that there is self-determination within our community to come on the other side of this and say, you know what, this is possible. It's important for us to nurse our babies, not only for the nutritive effect, but for us to know that when we have our babies close, this is one of the only times, by the way, that we can ensure their safety, right? We are priming them not only nutritionally, but we are laying down the foundation for their immune systems. We're also laying down the foundation for emotional literacy. You were talking about Trump earlier, and I heard this, and I think that a lot of us now have to deal with the fact that people did not have primal foundational connection with their mothers at an early age. They weren't held long enough. They weren't nursed long enough. They weren't loved in a deep way. And this is important for our communities, especially in a time where when you go out in the world, that there are threats to our life at every turn. So we have to, as Black women, reclaim our bodies as sacred and also reclaim this process as a radical act in the face of a world that is telling us that we do not matter, that our bodies do not matter, that our lives do not matter, that our children do not matter. We know that they do. And so when we hold them close and they feel our heartbeat and they get that milk, right, that liquid love also translates to connection. It also translates to nutrition, but also it primes them for the first 30 years of their life what their feeding patterns will look like. We do that in the face of formula companies that are aggressively trying to force formula down our throats when we go into places of birth to basically undermine our ability to feed our babies with food that we already have, right? And so in the face of all of that, we stand and we rise and we say we can do this and we can do this together so that we do show our community what's possible. And so we do need to see breastfeeding role models, right? We do need to see this in our community. I think social media is a wonderful place to see this also as a platform for folks to see what is possible. You don't have to know someone, but if you see someone do it, you know it's possible. And so I want to encourage us to find community, find other people who are breastfeeding, find a lactation group, find support so that you can be a part of this, because it's in our lineage and we're really designed to do it. And it's part of our reproductive experience, right? This is a reproductive right, to be able to breastfeed.
And all of you who are listening right now, and if you are pregnant, if you are in the midst of breastfeeding, Mama Glow's got you. She's got you covered. Go to mamaglow.com, Glow Maven Extraordinary. You can follow her on Twitter. That's Latham Thomas. You have all of the information that people need if they want to know all of the things about breastfeeding. It's Breastfeeding Awareness Month. Let me thank you for being here, Latham Thomas. Come back anytime.
Thank you so much for all the knowledge.